The night nurse had 22 years of experience. She said Noah wouldn't make it to morning. She had called families in before. She knew what the numbers meant. She called Kieran at 9 o'clock and told him to come. He came. He brought the dog. By morning the numbers had changed. This is that story. Noah was 11 days old. He had been born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition in which the left side of the heart is severely underdeveloped, in which the organ that should be doing the central work of keeping a body alive is, from the first moment, not built for it. The neonatologist had explained this to Kieran and his wife Sawayas in the specific careful language of a clinician delivering a truth that cannot be softened beyond a certain point. The condition was serious. The surgery, a staged repair, beginning in the first weeks of life, was the only pathway. Without it, Noah would not survive infancy. With it, the outcomes varied. There were children who had this surgery and went to school and played football and grew up. There were children who did not make it through the first repair. They had been in the second week of waiting for Noah to be stable enough to operate. He had not been stable enough. He had been deteriorating, quietly, persistently, in the specific way of a critically ill infant. The numbers on the monitors telling a story that the cardiac team read and discussed and adjusted medications for, and that kept telling the same story regardless. On the Tuesday evening, the numbers had changed in the wrong direction. Agnes had been the night nurse on the pediatric cardiac ward for 9 of her 22 years. She had the specific quality of a person who has been present for enough of these nights to know the difference between the nights that resolve and the nights that don't. She had looked at the monitors at 8:30. She had made the call at 9. Karen had arrived at 9:40. He was 34. A stonemason, a man whose physicality, the large capable hands, the specific solidity of someone who worked with heavy things, seemed to belong to a different kind of situation than the one he was in. He had been at the hospital every day since Noah's birth. He had driven home that evening only because Sawayas had been admitted for observation and someone needed to check the house and feed the dog. He had brought Bramble, not as a plan, not as a clinical decision. He had come in from the car and Bramble had been at the door, and the call from Agnes had been in his ears, and he had looked at the dog and thought, I can't leave him. Bramble was a 5-year-old border collie, black and white, lean, the specific alert steadiness of the breed. He had been with them since Noah's mother was pregnant, had been in the house through the diagnosis and the preparation and the birth and the 11 days of the ward. He had never been to the hospital. Kieran had carried him in under his jacket. Agnes had seen him come through the door. She had looked at the dog. She had looked at Kieran. She had said, "Put him down next to the incubator." Kieran had looked at her. 22 years, Agnes said. "I have a feeling. Put him down." Kieran put Bramble down next to the incubator. Bramble lay down. He pressed his side against the base of the incubator. He did not move again until morning. Neither did Kieran. Neither did Agnes. At 6:15 the cardiac registrar arrived for the morning handover. He looked at the monitors. He looked at Agnes. "What happened overnight?" he said. Agnes looked at the dog. "I'll put it in the notes," she said. A night nurse with 22 years of experience who said a baby wouldn't make it to morning. A father who came and brought the dog. A border collie who lay down beside an incubator and didn't move until 6:15. and a cardiac registrar who arrived for his morning handover and found numbers that should not have been possible. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Ring the bell. Because what happened in that ward overnight has a scientific explanation, and that explanation is changing how pediatric cardiac units think about compassionate animal contact. Before we go on, has an animal ever been present at a moment when the outcome should have been different? Not trained, not asked, just present. Tell us in the comments. Because Agnes made a decision at 9:40 that was not in any protocol she had been given, and by morning she knew she had been right. Now, back to Kieran, who is sitting in a hospital corridor at 6:15 waiting to find out what the morning means. Kieran and Sawais and Noah and Bramble and Agnes are characters we created. The hyperplastic left heart syndrome, the overnight stabilization, the surgery, these events are fictional. But the science underneath them is real. The documented effect of bonded animal presence on cardiac rhythm, autonomic regulation, and physiological stabilization in critically ill patients is an active area of research. The specific mechanism of rhythmic auditory and tactile input from a dog's heartbeat and breathing on an adjacent cardiac patient, the entrainment of an unstable rhythm to a consistent external one, is consistent with documented principles of cardiac co-regulation. We made these characters so the truth underneath them could be told as fully as possible. Kieran had grown up in County Clare. He had come to England at 22 for work, the stonemason's trade, the specific craft of someone who had learned from his father how to read stone and cut it and set it so it would outlast the person who placed it. He had been good at it. He had found, in the work, a satisfaction that was partly physical and partly something else. The sense of making something permanent, of contributing to structures that would stand after him. He had met Sawais at a wedding in Galway. She was the bride's cousin, he was the groom's friend. Two Irish people finding each other in a room full of Irish people with the specific inevitability that that situation sometimes produced. She was a primary school teacher, patient and precise and genuinely interested in the people in front of her in a way that her profession had not produced but had confirmed. They had been together for 4 years before Noah. Bramble had arrived in the second year, Sawas's idea. A border collie puppy from a farm in Derbyshire. An addition to the household that Kieran had agreed to with the mild skepticism of a man who had not grown up with dogs and had become, within 3 weeks, completely devoted. He had not expected the devotion. He had not expected a lot of things. The diagnosis had come at the 20-week scan, the sonographer's expression first, the specific professional stillness of someone calibrating how to say something, and then the referral and the fetal cardiologist and the word hyperplastic and the explanation that had taken 3 appointments and several evenings of research to fully assemble into something Kieran and Sawais could hold. Their son would be born with half a heart, not metaphorically, structurally. The left side, the side that pumped oxygenated blood to the body, underdeveloped to the point of dysfunction. Without intervention, days. With intervention, the staged surgical repair, beginning in the newborn period, a life. Uncertain in its shape, real in its possibility. They had chosen the intervention without hesitation. They had spent the remaining 20 weeks preparing in the way of 2 people who understand that preparation is not the same as control, but is the only thing available. Bramble had been in the house through all of it. He had pressed against Sawyer's legs through the evenings of research, and the phone calls, and the appointments. He had slept at the foot of their bed, through the months of waiting. He had been at the door when they came home from the hospital on the 11th day, Kieran alone, checking the house, feeding the dog, and had pressed against Kieran's legs in the same way he had pressed against Sawyer's. He had smelled something in Kieran that was not ordinary. He had stayed close, and when the door opened again and Kieran looked at him with the phone call from Agnes still in his ears, Bramble had looked back with the specific focused attention of a dog who knows that whatever is happening, he is part of it. Kieran had picked up the lead, then he had put it down, then he had picked up Bramble instead, and he had gone. The pediatric cardiac ward at 9:40 on a Tuesday evening had the specific quality of all hospital wards in the small hours, reduced, concentrated. The ordinary business of the building paused, and only the essential things continuing. Agnes had been at the nurse's station when Kieran came through. She had seen the jacket move. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. 22 years of palliative and acute nursing had given her a relationship with protocol that was thorough and reliable. She followed the rules because she had been present for enough of the situations the rules existed to prevent. She had also been present for enough nights to know that the rules were written by people who had not been in every room. She had looked at Kieran. She had looked at the jacket. She had thought about the monitors in Noah's room, about the numbers at 8:30, about what the numbers at 8:30 meant in her 22 years of experience. She had said, "Put him down next to the incubator." The room was small. The specific contained space of a single-room pediatric bay, equipment along 2 walls, the incubator central, a chair beside it where Kieran had spent every visiting hour of the past 11 days. Bramble had gone to the incubator without prompting. He had sniffed it, the thorough investigative sniff of a dog processing a new environment, and then he had lain down against its base, his side against the plastic, his head on his paws, his breathing slow. Kieran sat in the chair. Agnes stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the dog. She went back to the nurse's station and made a note in her personal log. Not the official record, not yet, just the private documentation of a nurse who has learned to write things down. She wrote Border Collie, approx 5 years. Positioned against incubator base, left side. Patient's father present. Monitors at 21:45. She wrote the numbers. She checked the monitors at midnight. She wrote the numbers. She checked at 2. She wrote the numbers. The numbers were not dramatically different. They were directionally different. The oxygen saturation, which had been trending downward through the evening, had stabilized. Not improved significantly, stabilized. Stopped its descent at a level that was still critical, but was not the level she had been watching it approach at 8:30. The heart rate, which had been irregular, the specific arrhythmic quality of a heart working without adequate structure, had not regularized, but the episodes of significant irregularity had reduced in frequency. Agnes was a careful woman. She did not reach for conclusions before the data supported them. She sat at the nurse's station at 3 in the morning and looked at her notes and thought about what she was seeing. She thought about Bramble against the incubator. She thought about his heartbeat, the slow, steady 60 beats per minute rhythm of a resting dog, the specific regularity of it, the way it would transmit through the plastic of the incubator base as vibration, as sound, as the low-frequency rhythmic signal of a living heart that knew how to beat. She thought, that is a very steady heart. She thought. And Noah's heart is trying to find a rhythm. She thought, I wonder. At 4:30, Bramble shifted position slightly. Kieran woke from the half-sleep of the chair. He looked at the monitors. He looked at Agnes in the doorway. She said nothing. She held up the notes. The numbers were better than they had been at 9 o'clock. Not good. Not safe. Not anywhere near what a cardiac team would call stable, but better. Kieran put his hand on Bramble's back. Bramble did not move. They stayed like that until morning. Dr. Adezo Okonkwo was the cardiac registrar who arrived at 6:15. She was thorough and precise, and not a person who reached for unusual explanations when conventional ones were available. She had looked at the overnight numbers with the specific attention of a clinician who needed to understand what had changed and why. She had conventional explanations available. The medication adjustments made at 7 the previous evening could account for some of the stabilization. The natural fluctuation of critical illness, the way numbers moved in both directions before a final direction was established, could account for more. She had documented these explanations in the morning notes. Then she had called Dr. Priya Nair. Dr. Nair was a researcher in pediatric cardiac physiology who had been studying the effect of environmental factors on cardiac rhythm stability in neonatal patients. The noise levels, the light cycles, the handling protocols, the specific question of what the ward environment was doing to hearts that were already working too hard. Dr. Okonkwo described the night, the numbers at 8:30, Agnes's call, the father arriving, the dog. There was a pause. Tell me about the dog's position, Dr. Nair said. Dr. Okonkwo read from Agnes's notes. Another pause. Pressed against the incubator base, Dr. Nair said slowly, left side. Yes. So the dog's heartbeat and respiratory rhythm were in direct contact with the incubator surface, transmitting through the base as low-frequency vibration and sound for. She paused, calculating. Approximately 8 hours. If Agnes's notes are accurate, yes. Dr. Nair was quiet for a long moment. She explained the mechanism carefully. Cardiac entrainment. The documented tendency of a heart to synchronize its rhythm to a consistent external rhythmic signal was an established phenomenon in cardiac research. It was the principle behind certain cardiac devices. It was why rhythm mattered in intensive care environments. A dog's resting heart rate, 55 to 65 beats per minute in a calm, settled animal, sat in a range that was relevant to neonatal cardiac regulation. Not identical to the target rhythm for a hyperplastic heart, but consistent, steady, slow enough to function as a stabilizing reference rather than an accelerating one. The transmission through the incubator base, vibration and low-frequency sound, was not the same as direct contact. It was attenuated, reduced, a signal rather than a direct input. But signals mattered. In a ward environment full of alarms and equipment sounds and the irregular rhythms of medical machinery, a consistent low-frequency biological heartbeat pressed against the base of an incubator for 8 hours was a different kind of signal. It's not sufficient to explain the full stabilization, Dr. Nair said carefully. The medication adjustment is the primary factor, but as a contributing element, a consistent rhythmic input in an environment that is otherwise arrhythmically noisy, it is plausible, more than plausible enough to investigate, Dr. Okonkwo said. Plausible enough to investigate. Dr. Nair said. She came to the ward the following week. She met Agnes. She read the full overnight notes. She sat in the room where Bramble had lain against the incubator and looked at the base of it for a long time. Then she looked at Agnes. You knew, she said. I had a feeling. Agnes said. 22 years of feelings, Dr. Nair said. 22 years, Agnes said. They're not always right. This one was, Dr. Nair said. Agnes looked at the incubator. The dog was right, she said. I just didn't stop him. We want to stop here. Because Agnes said something in that room that is the most important sentence in this story. The dog was right. I just didn't stop him. 22 years of experience. A death sentence at 9 o'clock. And a nurse who looked at a dog under a jacket and made a decision that was not in any protocol she had ever been given, because she had a feeling. And the feeling came from 22 years of being in rooms like that one, of knowing the difference between the nights that resolved and the nights that didn't, of understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is not stop the thing that is helping. The dog's heartbeat pressed against an incubator for 8 hours, a consistent, slow, biological rhythm in a ward full of alarms. A signal, not sufficient on its own, not a cure, but a contributing element in a night that should have gone differently. Tell us in the comments, has a nurse, a doctor, a carer ever made a decision for you or someone you love that wasn't in the protocol? That came from 22 years of knowing rather than from a manual. Tell us, because the cardiac surgeon is about to walk into this story, and she is the least likely person in this building to give a dog any credit. And she is about to change her mind. Mr. Okafor was the consultant pediatric cardiac surgeon. She had performed the first stage repair on 47 hypoplastic left heart syndrome patients in her career. She had a precise and unsentimental relationship with the data, with what the numbers meant, with what the surgery could and could not do, with the specific honest arithmetic of outcomes in this condition. She had been told about the dog by Dr. Okonkwo on the Wednesday morning. She had listened without interrupting. When Dr. Okonkwo finished, she said, "The medication adjustment at 1900 hours is the primary factor in the overnight stabilization." "Yes," Dr. Okonkwo said. "That's what I've documented. The dog is a confounding variable. Dr. Nair thinks it may be a contributing element." Mr. Okafor looked at the overnight notes. She was a careful person. She had built her career on being careful, on not reaching for explanations that the evidence did not support, on not giving families hope that the data did not justify, on not attributing outcomes to factors that could not be measured. A contributing element, she said, in the context of the ward acoustic environment and the specific properties of low-frequency rhythmic input on neonatal cardiac regulation. Dr. Okonkwo said. Dr. Nair is proposing a formal investigation. Mr. Okafor looked at the notes for a long time. She thought about Noah's numbers at 8:30. She thought about Noah's numbers at 6:15. She thought about the surgery she had performed on Thursday, the first stage repair that had been possible because the numbers at 6:15 had given her a patient stable enough to operate on. She thought about 47 patients. She thought about the ones who had not made it to the first repair. Nair's investigation, she said. What does it require from this ward? Access to the cardiac monitoring data, Agnes's notes. And Okonkwo paused. a formal, compassionate animal contact protocol, so that if this situation arises again, it can be managed properly rather than under a jacket. Mr. Okafor looked up. Under a jacket, she said. He carried the dog in under his jacket, Dr. Okonkwo said. A silence. Write the protocol, Mr. Okafor said. I'll review it. She stood up, and Dr. Okonkwo, she paused at the door. Tell Agnes she used good judgment. She left. Dr. Okonkwo sat at the desk. She thought that is the closest Mr. Okafor has ever come to crediting a dog. She wrote it in her notes. She thought it deserved to be recorded. Noah's surgery was on the Thursday. Mr. Okafor had operated with the specific focused precision of a surgeon who has done this before and who understands that doing it before does not make it routine, that each heart is its own situation, its own set of variables, its own relationship between what the surgeon can do and what the heart will accept. The surgery took 6 hours. It was successful, not completely, not finally. The staged repair required further procedures, further monitoring, the long, careful management of a heart that had been rebuilt rather than grown. But the first stage was done. The structure that Noah needed to survive infancy was in place. Mr. Okafor came out to Kieran and Sawayas. Sawayas discharged and present now, pale and steady in the chair beside Kieran, and gave them the word. Successful. Kieran had put his face in his hands. Sawayas had been very still. Then she had said, "Where's Bramble?" Bramble was in the car. Don, Kieran's colleague, who had driven them, had him on a lead in the car park. Sawayas had said, "Bring him in." Don had brought him in. Bramble had gone to Kieran first, then to Sawayas. Then he had sat down between them. Dop. Nair's paper was published 8 months later. It was co-authored with Agnes, who had never published anything before, and who had accepted the co-authorship with the specific grace of a person who knows the work is more important than the credit, but understands why the credit matters. The paper was titled Canine Cardiac Rhythm as Environmental Stabilization Input in Neonatal Cardiac Patients, a case study and proposed mechanism for low-frequency biological rhythm transmission in pediatric intensive care settings. It was careful and precise. It did not claim that the dog had saved Noah's life. It claimed that the dog's presence had been a contributing element in an overnight stabilization that had made surgery possible, that the mechanism was plausible, documented in principle, and worthy of formal investigation across a larger patient cohort. It was cited 19 times in the first year. The Compassionate Animal Contact Protocol, developed by Dr. Okonkwo and reviewed by Mr. Okafor, and adopted by the ward 6 weeks after Noah's discharge, was the first of its kind in a pediatric cardiac unit in the country. Agnes framed the protocol on the wall of the nurse's station. Not the official version, her own copy. She had written one line at the bottom in her own handwriting. She had written, "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is not stop the thing that is helping." Nobody asked her to remove it. Nobody wanted to. Noah was 10 months old when the paper was published. He was in the second stage of his cardiac journey. The follow-up surgeries still ahead, the monitoring continuous, the life he was building one carefully managed month at a time. He was, in the word that his cardiologist used at every review, progressing, not a cure, a life being built. Kieran had gone back to the stonework. He had a commission, a garden wall for a house in Cheshire, the specific satisfying work of setting stone so it would stand. He had been thinking, while he worked, about permanence. about the things that lasted. He thought about the Tuesday night, about Agnes calling at 9 o'clock, about driving to the hospital with Bramble under his jacket. He had not planned it. He had looked at the dog and thought, I can't leave him. And he had gone. He thought about what would have happened if he had left Bramble at home. He thought about the numbers at 8:30 and the numbers at 6:15. He thought, I will never know exactly what Bramble did. He thought, I know that he was there. He thought, and I know that by morning the numbers had changed. Sawayas had gone back to teaching in January. She had told her class, Year 2, 7-year-olds, an age that receives information with the specific, unfiltered directness of children who have not yet learned to perform septicism. About Noah and about Bramble, one child had put her hand up. Did the dog know? She said. Sawayas had thought about this. I think he knew something was wrong, she said. I think he came because Kieran needed him. And I think when he got there, he did what dogs do. He stayed close and he was steady, and he kept his heartbeat very calm all night. The child had nodded. That's a good dog, she said. Yes, Sawayas said. She thought about Bramble against the incubator. She thought about the heartbeat, slow, steady, 60 beats per minute, all night. That's a very good dog, she said. The night nurse had 22 years of experience. She said Noah wouldn't make it to morning. She called Kieran at 9 o'clock. He came. He brought the dog, and by morning the numbers had changed. Agnes didn't stop the thing that was helping. That is the whole story. A nurse who trusted her 22 years over the protocol. A father who couldn't leave the dog behind. A border collie who lay down against an incubator and kept his heartbeat steady for 8 hours. And a baby who made it to surgery. Share this video today. Share it with every NICU parent, every pediatric nurse, every cardiac ward that does not yet have a compassionate animal contact protocol. Share it with every person who has ever been told the numbers say one thing and felt something else was also true because Agnes wrote one line at the bottom of the protocol. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is not stop the thing that is helping. Subscribe if you are new here. We are back every week. Ring the bell. And our final question. Has anyone ever not stopped the thing that was helping you when the rules said they should have? A nurse, a doctor, a teacher, anyone? Tell us in the comments. Because Agnes made a decision at 9:40 that was not in any manual, and by morning, it was the right one.